In 1910, the Flexner Report shut down 75% of American medical schools. Not because they were failing, because they were winning. The schools they closed first were the ones teaching herbal medicine, botanical healing, and plant-based remedies that had worked for centuries without a patent, without a prescription, and without a profit margin. The people who funded that report did not want you learning that. Your great-grandmother already knew it. Hit subscribe. What you are about to hear is not alternative medicine. It is the medicine that existed before the alternative existed. Let us get into it. Number 25. Raw honey. On an open wound. Before antiseptic cream came in a tube, it came from a hive. Your great-grandmother kept a jar of raw honey in the medicine cabinet, not the kitchen, and she reached for it the moment anyone in the household came in bleeding. She spread it thick over the wound, covered it with a clean cloth, and changed the dressing twice a day. The trick was the hydrogen peroxide. Raw honey produces it naturally through an enzyme called glucose oxidase, releasing a slow, steady concentration directly into the wound surface. A 2011 meta-analysis published in the Journal of Wound Care reviewed 22 clinical trials involving honey-based wound dressings and found statistically significant reductions in healing time compared to conventional dressings. Your grandma did not know the chemistry, but she knew the wound closed clean. And what came after honey on the skin is what she did when honey was not enough, when the cut was deeper and the infection was threatening to spread. She walked outside and pulled it from between the cracks in the garden path. Number 24, plantain poultice. Not the banana, the weed. Plantago major, the broad-leafed plant that grows in every disturbed soil, every lawn, every crack, and every sidewalk in temperate North America. Your great-grandmother called it by the name she learned from her own grandmother. She chewed a leaf, packed the softened mass directly onto the wound or insect sting, and held it in place with a strip of cloth. The trick was the aucubin. Plantain leaf contains a compound called aucubin, an iridoid glycoside with documented anti-inflammatory properties, alongside allantoin, which promotes cell proliferation in healing tissue. A 2015 study in the journal Phytomedicine confirmed plantain extracts inhibit prostaglandin synthesis, which is the same mechanism targeted by ibuprofen. Great-grandma never needed a pharmacy. She needed to look down at the ground she was standing on. But the next remedy she reached for when the bleeding would not stop is the one that Civil War field surgeons packed in their kits. But before we move on, if plantain growing through a sidewalk crack just became the most interesting thing you have seen all week, you are exactly where you need to be. Hit like, drop a comment telling me which remedy surprised you most, and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming. It gets harder to explain away from here. Number 23. Yarrow to stop bleeding. Achillea millefolium. The name comes from Achilles, who according to Homer used this plant to stop the bleeding of his soldiers' wounds on the plains of Troy. Your great-grandmother grew it in every garden border. When a cut bled longer than it should, your grandmother crushed the feathery leaves between her palms, pressed the mass directly onto the wound, and held steady pressure for 5 minutes. The trick was the alkaloid achillene, documented as a hemostatic agent capable of reducing blood clotting time by measurable margins. The bleeding stopped because the chemistry demanded it. She did not need to know the compound's name. She needed the plant to be within arm's reach. It always was. But stopping bleeding was only the beginning of what her garden could do. What came next was not for wounds that were open, but for tissue that had torn, bruised, and begun to swell, and it is the remedy that modern sports medicine quietly rehabilitated after 50 years of discouragement. Number 22. Comfrey for bruises and sprains. They called it knitbone. Your great-grandmother made a poultice from the broad, bristly leaves of Symphytum officinale and pressed it onto sprained ankles, bruised shins, and swollen joints. She wrapped it in place and left it overnight. By morning, the swelling had gone down in ways that surprised people who had not seen it before. The trick was allantoin, concentrated in comfrey at levels far higher than in plantain, combined with rosmarinic acid, both working together to reduce inflammation and accelerate connective tissue repair. A 2004 randomized clinical trial published in Phytomedicine compared a comfrey root extract cream to a diclofenac gel, which is a pharmaceutical anti-inflammatory, on acute ankle sprains. Comfrey outperformed the pharmaceutical on pain reduction and swelling at the 72-hour mark. The drug company that manufactured the diclofenac gel did not publish a press release about that study. Your great-grandmother did not need one. She had the evidence wrapped around her ankle every other week during harvest season. But if comfrey handled the deep tissue, the next remedy on this list handled what sat on top of it: the redness, the rawness, and the slow burn of skin that had been pushed too far. Number 21. Calendula for rashes and irritation. Calendula officinalis, pot marigold. Every cottage garden had it. Your great-grandmother made an infused oil by packing the dried flower heads into a jar of olive oil and letting them sit in a warm windowsill for 4 to 6 weeks, then straining and storing the golden oil in a dark bottle. The trick was the flavonoids, specifically isorhamnetin and narcissin, alongside triterpenoids that activate macrophage activity in the skin. The grandmothers of those days would apply it to rashes, chapped skin, windburn, and the raw patches that appeared on babies in winter. The oncology unit used what your great-grandmother grew for free at the edge of her vegetable bed. She would not have been surprised. She knew what the plant could do. But the last remedy in this first group is the one that needs the least explanation and has generated the most deliberate corporate confusion. A plant so well studied, its own industry had to pay researchers to cast doubt on it. Number 20. Aloe vera for burns. She kept a pot of it on the kitchen windowsill. Every farmhouse kitchen had one. When a hand caught the edge of the stove or a splash of boiling water landed on an arm, she broke a leaf from the aloe plant, split it open, and pressed the clear gel directly onto the burn. She held it there, cool and immediate, and the pain followed the gel downward, fading faster than it had any right to. The trick was the polysaccharide asamanin, which creates a film over the wound surface that simultaneously cools, seals, and delivers anti-inflammatory compounds directly to the tissue. A 2007 meta-analysis in the Burns Journal reviewed 4 randomized trials and found aloe vera gel healed first and second-degree burns an average of 8.9 days faster than conventional dressings. She did not know the number. She knew the pain left faster than it came. And if the skin remedies your great-grandmother kept have already changed the way you see a garden, wait until you hear what she did for the chest, the lungs, and the immune system that kept her family upright through every winter the calendar could produce. Number 19. Elderberry syrup before the season started. She did not wait to get sick. Every August, when the elderberries on Sambucus nigra came heavy and dark blue-black, she harvested them, cooked them down with raw honey and cloves and cinnamon, strained out the seeds, and stored the thick syrup in sealed jars in the cellar. The trick was the anthocyanins. They bind directly to influenza virions and block their ability to attach to host cells. She gave it to her family by the tablespoon every morning from October through March. A 2019 meta-analysis in complementary therapies in medicine confirmed elderberry substantially reduced upper respiratory symptoms across multiple studies. She made it in August because the berries would not wait. She gave it in October because the viruses would not either. But elderberry was only the opening move. What she combined it with on the first sign of a sore throat is a preparation so potent that a 2012 study compared it favorably to commercial antibiotics for certain bacterial infections. Number 18. Garlic and raw honey. When the throat began to scratch, she acted that same evening. She minced 4 cloves of fresh garlic, mixed them into 2 tablespoons of raw, local honey, and gave it by the teaspoon every 3 hours. Your grandmother gave it to everyone, not just the sick one. The sick one recovered faster. The well ones usually stayed well. The trick was allicin, the sulfur compound released when garlic is crushed, with documented antimicrobial action against Staphylococcus aureus, Escherichia coli, and strains of Candida. She crushed the garlic and reached for the honey jar before the word antibiotic existed. She had already solved the problem the word was invented to describe. But garlic was not the only thing she put on or around the body when the chest tightened and the cough came rattling in. What she did next will make you look at your pantry differently, and the evidence for it was published not in an herbalism journal, but in a mainstream pediatric medicine review. Number 17. The onion sock. The pediatricians who dismissed it have never explained why it works as well as it does. Your great-grandmother cut a raw onion into thick rings, wrapped them in a thin cloth, and placed the bundle inside a wool sock. She put the sock on a feverish child's foot at bedtime. In the morning, the onion had turned gray, and the child's fever had often broken. The trick was quercetin and sulfur compounds, absorbed transdermally through the plantar surface of the foot, one of the most capillary-dense surfaces on the human body. A 2016 review in the journal Biomedicine and Pharmacotherapy cataloged over 60 peer-reviewed studies confirming quercetin's immunomodulatory effects. She put the sock on and trusted what her mother had shown her. And if the onion sock handled the fever, the next remedy on this list handled the cough that came with it, a plant so well suited for the lungs that respiratory clinics in Europe never stopped using it, even as American medicine told its patients it was folklore. Number 16. Mullein for the lungs. Verbascum thapsus grows along every roadside, every fence line, every disturbed margin in North America. Your great-grandmother harvested the large, velvety leaves in summer, dried them on a screen in the shade, and stored them in a cloth sack. When a chest cough settled in and would not move, she steeped a tablespoon of dried mullein leaf in boiling water for 15 minutes, strained it through a fine cloth to remove the tiny leaf hairs, and gave it as tea 3 times a day. The trick was the saponins, which act as expectorants by loosening mucus from the bronchial walls and allowing the body to clear it naturally. She was one data point in a pattern that circled the globe. But mullein was the tea for the sick day. What she brewed every morning for the household, sick or well, is the remedy that modern immunology has spent the last 2 decades trying to put in a capsule and patent. Number 15. Thyme tea and the respiratory system. Your grandmother grew it in a clay pot by the kitchen door, Thymus vulgaris. When winter set in, she brewed it fresh every morning, a small handful of leaves steeped for 10 minutes in boiling water, sometimes with a slice of lemon and a drizzle of raw honey. It was not presented as medicine. It was presented as tea. The effect was the same either way. The trick was thymol, the phenolic compound that gives thyme its sharp scent and functions as a bronchodilator and expectorant. It is the same compound used as the active ingredient in commercial cough preparations sold in European pharmacies today. A 2006 clinical study published in Arzneimittelforschung, a German pharmaceutical research journal, found that a thyme-ivy combination extract was as effective as the synthetic expectorant ambroxol in treating acute bronchitis, with a superior side effect profile. The pharmaceutical preparation was as effective as the tea she brewed before breakfast. The tea cost nothing and produced no side effects at all. She gave it to her children like it was nothing. It was everything. And if what she did for the lungs has already started to shift something in you, what she did for the gut and the digestive system is where things become genuinely difficult to explain without asking some uncomfortable questions about the last 70 years of nutritional medicine. Number 14. Ginger root for nausea and inflammation. She kept a hand of fresh ginger root in the cellar through the winter and dried powdered ginger in a tin on the shelf above it. For nausea, a cup of ginger tea. For the deep joint pain that settled in with cold weather, a stronger preparation taken twice a day. She did not consider these different problems. She had one root. It handled both. She used it for 30 years without a side effect other than warmth, but ginger handled the acute. What she reached for when the gut itself was damaged, when something had gone wrong in the digestion at a deeper level, was a remedy so effective for intestinal inflammation that modern gastroenterologists studying it are embarrassed by how long it was ignored. But hold on, we are halfway through and the evidence keeps stacking. If someone in your life needs to hear this, share it right now. Like the video, subscribe if you have not already, and comment below with the one remedy your own grandmother swore by. I read every single one. Keep going with me. Number 13. Slippery elm for the gut. The inner bark of Ulmus rubra, ground to a fine powder, stirred into warm water or milk and taken slowly. Your great-grandmother used it for stomach ulcers, for colitis, for the raw and burning gut complaints that the 20th century would eventually brand with clinical names and treat with drugs that often made the underlying inflammation worse before they made it better. The trick was the mucilage. Slippery elm powder, when mixed with water, produces a thick, gel-like substance that coats the entire digestive tract from mouth to intestine, forming a physical barrier between the irritated mucosa and the stomach acid or bile that is aggravating it. A 2010 pilot study published in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine found slippery elm bark significantly improved bowel habits and reduced IBS-related discomfort in a patient group over 8 weeks. She gave it to people who were suffering. It worked before the study existed, and it will work after the study is forgotten. But Slippery Elm was the gentle option, what she brewed when the immune system needed a serious intervention, when a cold winter had depleted everything, was the preparation she called fire cider, and no physician alive in 1920 would have argued with her about its effectiveness. Number 12. Fire cider raw, apple cider vinegar, horseradish, garlic, onion, ginger, hot peppers. She packed them all into a wide-mouthed jar, covered them completely with raw apple cider vinegar, and left them to infuse for 4 weeks in a dark cupboard, shaking the jar every day. The trick was synergy. Every single ingredient carries individually documented antimicrobial or anti-inflammatory properties. Together they deliver allicin, gingerols, capsaicin, quercetin, and acetic acid simultaneously. After 4 weeks, she strained it, sweetened the liquid with raw honey, and bottled it. She took a tablespoon a day through the winter. She gave it to anyone who came to her door feeling the first sign of a cold dropping in. No single study has evaluated fire cider as a complete preparation because no single company stands to profit from a recipe that requires a jar, a dark cupboard, and 5 ingredients anyone can grow. The next secret on this list is what she made year-round from the bones of every animal she cooked, something so nutritionally complete that the food industry spent decades replacing it with a powder in a foil packet, while hospital nutritionists quietly continued recommending the real thing for post-surgical recovery. Number 11. Bone broth. She never threw a bone away. After every roast, every bird, every knuckle and neck and foot she could find, she filled the largest pot in the kitchen. Cold water, a splash of raw apple cider vinegar, brought slowly to a simmer. She let it run for 24 to 36 hours. She added water as needed. She never let it boil hard. A 2017 study in the Journal of Renal Nutrition confirmed that bone broth contains bioavailable calcium and magnesium at levels that meaningfully contribute to daily mineral intake. Your great-grandmother made it because nothing was wasted. She could not have guessed that the joint supplement aisle would someday charge $40 per month for compounds she was pulling from a 5-cent knuckle bone over a wood stove. But bone broth was nourishing. The next remedy is the one that cleaned the system from the inside out and has a body of research behind it that the coffee substitute industry spent 30 years attempting to bury. Number 10. Dandelion root. Every spring she dug the roots of Taraxacum officinale from the field before they flowered. She washed them, roasted them in a low oven until they were deep brown and smelled of coffee, ground them coarse, and brewed them as a morning tea. She drank it with intention. She gave it to anyone whose liver she was worried about, anyone whose digestion had slowed, anyone who looked pale and sluggish after a long winter eating preserved food. The trick was the bitter compounds, sesquiterpene lactones, that stimulate bile production in the liver and gallbladder, and inulin, a prebiotic fiber that feeds beneficial bacteria in the colon. A 2011 study published in Evidence-Based Complementary and Alternative Medicine confirmed dandelion root extract increased urinary frequency and volume in human subjects, confirming its traditional use as a diuretic that supports kidney function without depleting potassium, which pharmaceutical diuretics frequently do. She drank it because it made her feel clean in a way she had learned to recognize over decades. And what she ate every single day, not as medicine but as food, is the remedy that 2 world wars accidentally proved was one of the most powerful immune and gut interventions in the human dietary tradition. Number 9. Sauerkraut. She made it in a stone crock every fall when the cabbage harvest came in. Shredded cabbage, pressed with salt, packed into the crock, weighed down with a stone, and left to ferment at cellar temperature for 6 to 8 weeks. That was all. No vinegar, no heat, no processing, just salt, cabbage, thyme, and the wild lactobacillus bacteria that live naturally on the surface of every cabbage leaf. The trick was the live culture count. Traditionally fermented sauerkraut contains concentrations of Lactobacillus plantarum and related species that reach into the trillions of colony-forming units per serving, numbers that commercial probiotic supplements rarely approach and cannot match in terms of bacterial diversity. A 2012 study in the World Journal of Microbiology and Biotechnology identified 28 distinct beneficial bacterial strains in a single traditionally fermented sauerkraut sample. The grocery store version is pasteurized. dead. She knew which one worked because she had watched it work for 40 years. And if the gut and immune remedies have changed how you see the food your great-grandmother preserved, the next two items on this list will reach into the history of pharmacology itself and force a question that no one in the pharmaceutical industry wants to answer out loud. Number 8. Ginger and honey for the chest. When the cough had moved into the chest and the breathing had begun to tighten, she did not reach for garlic. She reached for the ginger root, fresh juice, squeezed and strained, raw honey stirred in, warm, not hot, taken in slow sips while the child sat upright. Grandma gave it to her children when they wheezed in the night, and she watched them settle back into sleep. She did not know the pharmacology. She knew the breathing slowed and deepened before the cup was empty. But if breathing was what she protected with ginger and honey, the next item on this list was what she relied on for the pain that no amount of rest seemed to touch. The pain of inflammation that settled into the joints and would not move. And the compound she used for it was the original source of the most widely sold pharmaceutical in the history of modern medicine. Number 7. Meadowsweet for inflammation and pain, Filipendula ulmaria. She brewed the dried flowers and leaves in boiling water for 15 minutes and gave the tea twice daily for headaches, joint pain, and the general ache of a body that had been working too hard for too long. The taste was faintly sweet and slightly astringent. The relief was dependable. A 2009 review in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology documented meadowsweet's salicylate content and its traditional use across 11 European and North American cultures for pain and fever management. She brewed what Bayer eventually patented. The patent ran out. The plant never did. But the number 6 remedy on this list did not need a chemist to notice it, because its effects were visible in the fastest and most direct form of biological feedback that exists. The skin cleared, the wound closed, the fever broke, and the preparation that produced all three of those outcomes is the one that the digestive remedy market spent the 1990s quietly trying to turn into a supplement while keeping the original recipe out of mainstream awareness. Number 6. Fire cider, vinegar tonic for chronic inflammation. Here is the longer version of what fire cider does over time. Not the acute immune hit, but the daily maintenance. Women who took a tablespoon of raw apple cider vinegar in warm water before each meal reported the same thing over decades. Researchers in 2007 confirmed it in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Consistent daily consumption of acetic acid, the primary compound in vinegar, measurably reduced fasting blood glucose. It improved insulin sensitivity in patients with type 2 diabetes and prediabetes. The trick was the acetic acid's interference with the enzymes that break down starches, specifically amylase inhibition, which slows glucose absorption after a starch-heavy meal and prevents the blood sugar spike that drives chronic systemic inflammation over years and decades. She took it because her mother took it and because it made her feel better after large meals. She had no idea she was managing a metabolic condition that would someday be called a global epidemic. She managed it with a tablespoon before breakfast. And what she managed alongside it, the slow, cumulative, generational wisdom about the intersection of the kitchen and the medicine cabinet, is what brings us to the final two items, the ones that are not just remedies, but a philosophy. The two that will make you understand why this knowledge was not forgotten by accident. Number 5. Turmeric and black pepper. For systemic inflammation, curcuma longa. She used it in everything yellow. Soups, broths, rubs for roasted meat, stirred into warm milk with honey before bed. It was not a supplement, it was a spice. She ground the dried root herself, kept it in a small tin, and added a pinch to more dishes than any visitor to her kitchen could count. She knew that pepper belonged with turmeric the way salt belongs with bread. A 2006 review in the journal Advanced Experimental Medicine and Biology cataloged over 3,000 peer-reviewed studies on curcumin's anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and potential anti-cancer properties. She pinched it into every pot. The pharmaceutical industry has spent 40 years trying to create a patentable version of the compound it contains. So far, they have not managed to improve on the spice tin. And the next item on this list is not a herb, or a food, or a remedy. It is a document. It is the proof that this knowledge survived the forces that tried to eliminate it, and it has a name and a publication date and a Library of Congress catalog number. Number 4. Echinacea, for immune activation. Your great-grandmother grew Echinacea purpurea in the garden border, the tall purple cone flower that most people today keep as an ornamental without knowing what it was planted for. When the cold season began, she made a tincture. Fresh roots and flowers packed into a jar with high-proof alcohol, sealed, and left for 6 weeks. A few drops in a glass of water at the first sign of illness. The trick was the alkylamides and polysaccharides that stimulate macrophage activity, the first responders of the immune system. A 2015 Cochrane review analyzed 24 randomized trials covering over 4,000 patients and found echinacea preparations reduced the risk of catching a cold by 58% and reduced the duration of existing colds by 1.4 days compared to placebo. She grew it because it kept her household on its feet through winter. The Cochrane collaboration, which publishes the most rigorous medical evidence reviews in the world, confirmed what she already knew. But confirmation was never something she was waiting for. She had a garden and a family to keep healthy, and she could not afford to wait for a study. She planted what worked. She passed down what lasted. And the final 2 items on this list are the ones that, taken together, explain not just what she knew, but why it matters so urgently right now that you know it too. Number 3. Willow bark for pain. Salix alba, white willow. The bark of the young branches, stripped in spring when the sap was running, dried in the shade, and stored in a cloth bag for the year ahead. She boiled a tablespoon in 2 cups of water for 20 minutes, let it cool, and gave it for headaches, for the pain of monthly cramping, and for the chronic joint pain that settled in with age. The trick was salicin, the glycoside compound that the human liver converts to salicylic acid after ingestion. Salicylic acid is the biological active form of aspirin. Bayer isolated it, acetylated it to reduce stomach irritation, and patented acetyl salicylic acid in 1899 under the brand name aspirin. The plant that generated the compound had been used for pain by documented medical traditions for at least 2,400 years, with records in the Ebers Papyrus, the ancient Egyptian medical document dated to approximately 1,500 BC. She brewed the bark before breakfast, before Bayer existed, before the patent, before the white tablet in the orange bottle. She was doing what physicians in ancient Egypt had written down as established practice 3,500 years earlier. The unbroken chain from the bark to the bottle runs through every kitchen she ever stood in, and what comes next is not a remedy. It is the reason you are watching this. It is the reason any of this survived at all. Number 2, the Foxfire books. In 1972, a high school English teacher in Rabun County, Georgia, named Elliot Wigginton, gave his struggling students a project. Go into the Appalachian Mountains around them, find the oldest people, record everything they know, how to make soap, how to render lard, how to cure a chest cough with a poultice, how to use willow bark for pain, how to stop a wound from bleeding, how to preserve meat without refrigeration, how to birth a calf, build a chimney, treat a fever, set a broken bone, and cure a ham. Write it all down before it disappears. The result was the Foxfire magazine, which became the Foxfire book series, 12 volumes over 3 decades, each one a direct transcription of the knowledge held by people who had never trusted a pharmacy because a pharmacy had never been close enough to trust. The book sold more than 9 million copies. They are still in print. They are available in every major library system in the United States. The knowledge in them was not invented or synthesized or patented. It was memorable. It was pulled out of the mouths of old people in the hills before it went with them into the ground. Your great-grandmother's knowledge did not disappear. Some of it was transcribed, archived, and shelved in a library 700 miles from where she kept her remedy tin. What you are hearing right now is not a eulogy. It is an address. Number 1, they buried the curriculum. She kept the knowledge. Everything on this list shares one property that no pharmaceutical product in history has ever been able to replicate. It was already yours. No prescription required. No insurance claim filed. Your great-grandmother did not have a medicine cabinet organized by condition. She had a garden organized by season and a pantry organized by need, and the 2 systems together addressed more human health conditions than any single physician practicing today could treat from a prescription pad. Not because she was a genius, because she was the end product of a tradition of accumulated observation, carried forward by women who could not afford to be wrong. The Flexner Report of 1910 did not destroy that knowledge. It removed it from the curriculum. It drove it out of the classroom and back into the kitchen, where it had always lived anyway. It survived 2 world wars there, the Great Depression, the industrialization of the food supply, the pharmaceutical marketing era, and a 50-year campaign to replace every plant remedy with a patented molecular analog derived from the same plant. The knowledge your great-grandmother carried was not folk medicine. It was the medicine. The folk were the ones who kept it when the institution stopped teaching it. If this changed the way you see what is already in your hands, hit the like button. It costs you nothing. Subscribe if you are not already here, because what is coming next goes deeper than this list, into the remedies that were erased before anyone thought to write them down, and into the women who memorized them anyway. Share this with one person, just one, because somewhere in your circle, someone's grandmother did every single thing on this list, and the knowledge did not die with her. It is waiting in the ground. Stay with us. The next video is already coming.